Welcome to a deep dive into one of early America's wildest stories, the Burr conspiracy.
Oh, yeah.
It's 1805,
Yeah,
just a few decades after the Revolution. The U.S. is still figuring things out,
right.
and here comes Aaron Burr,
Yeah.
fresh off a duel that killed Alexander Hamilton, heading west with a plan that could have split the nation in two. We're using the American History Tellers podcast episode, Gathering Forces,
Okay.
to piece together this puzzle. So by the end, you'll not only know what Burr attempted, but why it almost worked.
It is fascinating to think about how fragile the young nation was at this point.
Yeah.
You have all these competing interests, regional tensions, ambitious figures vying for power.
Right. Like the ink on the Constitution was barely dry, and already there's talk of breaking it apart. But let's rewind a bit. Burr kills Hamilton in that infamous duel, gets indicted for murder, and flees south. I find it surprising that he found support there,
Yeah.
especially from people who dislike Hamilton's policies.
It speaks to the deep political divisions of the time. Hamilton represented a strong central government, which alienated many who feared a return to monarchy. They saw Burr, despite the duel, as someone who might champion states' rights.
So even as a wanted man, Burr returns to Washington, D.C. as the sitting vice president to oversee the impeachment trial of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase.
Wow.
That's got to be one of the most awkward moments in American history.
The irony is incredible. Burr, accused of violating the law, is now the one upholding it in this high-profile case. And what's even more intriguing is that he uses his time in Washington to discreetly meet with General James Wilkinson, commander of U.S. forces in the West, who, as you know, was secretly on the Spanish payroll.
Wait, hold on. So the guy Burr is meeting with, the one who's supposed to be defending the U.S., is actually working for Spain.
Yeah,
That's playing both sides to a whole new level.
precisely. This meeting sets the stage for a tangled web of intrigue and conflicting loyalties. It's crucial to understand that Wilkinson's motivations were complex, likely a mix of ambition, opportunism, and perhaps even genuine concern about the stability of the U.S.
Okay, so we have Burr, the disgraced politician, connecting with Wilkinson, the double agent. And into all this comes the Louisiana Purchase.
Yeah.
Tell me what was life like in New Orleans, this newly acquired territory that's now a hotbed of unrest.
Imagine yourself stepping off a ship in New Orleans in 1805. You're hit by a wall of humidity, the sounds of a bustling port city, a mix of languages, French, Spanish, English. The Creoles, descendants of the original French and Spanish settlers, are now under American rule, and they're not happy about it.
Yeah.
They felt their culture, their way of life was under threat.
It's like they woke up one day and suddenly had a new government. I can see why there would be resentment.
And that's exactly what Burr sees an opportunity. He starts cultivating relationships with Creole delegates who are in Washington to voice their grievances against the U.S. government.
So instead of laying low, Burr's out there making connections with people who are already dissatisfied with the U.S. That's bold even for him.
Remember, Burr was a master networker.
Yeah.
He possessed this uncanny ability to sense people's ambitions, their frustrations, and he knew how to tailor his message to appeal to them. He wouldn't have outright said, "Join my rebellion." It would have been more subtle, hinting at shared grievances, a potential for change, perhaps even suggesting that he understood their desire for independence.
So there's Burr working his charm on the Creoles.
Huh.
And then there's Wilkinson, who's secretly encouraging those same delegates to talk to Burr. This is like a conspiracy within a conspiracy.
Wilkinson's role is fascinating. He's playing both sides, but to what end? Was he truly loyal to Burr, or was he using the situation to further his own interests with Spain? It's a question historians still debate. Think about the scene: Wilkinson and a Creole delegate huddled in a dimly lit tavern, whispering over tankards of ale, sowing seeds of doubt about the U.S. government. It's the perfect breeding ground for conspiracy.
All right, so we've got this stage set. Burr's made these key connections, and the Louisiana Purchase has created this powder keg of tension. What happens next? Does Burr just come right out and say, okay, let's overthrow the government?
No, not quite. He's far too cunning for that. He knows he needs more support, more resources. So in the spring of 1805, Burr embarks on a grand tour of the West officially to oversee a canal project, but with a hidden agenda.
It sounds like the start of a great Western adventure novel. But this is real life with real stakes. Who does Burr meet along this journey, and how does he gain their trust?
He travels by boat and horseback, meeting with influential figures like Jonathan Dayton, a New Jersey politician who is actually a signer of the Constitution, and Andrew Jackson, a rising star in Tennessee, who would of course later become President. Burr would have adapted his approach to each person, gauging their ambitions, their grievances.
So he's playing this delicate game, dropping hints of a grand plan without revealing all the details. I can see why people were drawn to him. There's this element of mystery, this feeling of being part of something big and secretive.
Exactly. And you have to remember, this is a time when the future of the West is still very much up in the air. People are looking for leaders for opportunities. Burr, with his charisma and connections, would have seemed like someone who could shape that future.
So Burr's out west, gathering support. But where does this journey ultimately lead him? What's the final destination in this first stage of his plan?
His travels take him down the Ohio River, eventually landing him in New Orleans, a city that was already buzzing with talk of adventure and opportunity, particularly when it came to Spanish Mexico. And it's in New Orleans that Burr will connect with a group that will play a pivotal role in his scheme, the Mexico Association.
Okay, this is where things really start to heat up, right?
Yeah.
Tell me more about this Mexico Association. Who were they and what made them so important to Burr's plans?
The Mexico Association was this secretive group of adventurers, businessmen, even some government officials. They were united by a common goal, seizing Spanish Mexico for themselves, believing it was ripe for the taking.
It sounds like a mix of opportunism and patriotism with a dash of Wild West lawlessness thrown in. I can picture them meeting in smoke-filled rooms, plotting their daring raids.
You're not far off. And for Burr, the Mexico Association represented everything he needed: potential manpower, local knowledge, and perhaps most importantly, a shared ambition for conquest.
So Burr arrives in New Orleans, this hotbed of intrigue, and he finds himself surrounded by people who are already dreaming of taking Mexico. It seems like he's found the perfect partners in crime.
And it's in New Orleans that he takes another crucial step, securing funding from Daniel Clark, a prominent member of the association, and learning about a cache of abandoned French cannons, a potentially game-changing asset for any military campaign.
Whoa, so now we're talking about real military hardware. This is no longer just whispers and backroom deals. Burr's plan is starting to take shape.
Yes, but as Burr builds his network of support and resources, his activities don't go unnoticed. Rumors about his true intentions begin to swirl, reaching as far as President Jefferson himself.
It sounds like the walls are closing in, even as Burr thinks he's laying the groundwork for his grand scheme. This is where things get really interesting, isn't it?
It certainly does. We're about to enter a phase of the story where suspicion and intrigue are at their peak. What happens when those whispers reach Jefferson? How does he react to the possibility of a conspiracy brewing right under his nose?
We left off with Burr gathering support and resources down in New Orleans while whispers of his true intentions start to reach President Jefferson. What happens when those whispers turn into shouts?
Jefferson finds himself in a delicate position. Remember, he's a man who deeply values individual liberty and is wary of government overreach. He doesn't want to appear tyrannical by cracking down on someone based solely on rumors, especially as former vice president.
So he's walking this tightrope between protecting the nation and upholding his own principles. It's a tough spot to be in.
Absolutely.
I know.
But as Burr continues his activities, Jefferson starts receiving more concrete warnings. Anonymous letters arrive detailing Burr's plans for a military expedition, and even hinting at a possible attempt to seize land from Spain or perhaps even separate parts of the U.S.
It's fascinating to think about those letters. Were they from genuine concerned citizens, political rivals trying to sabotage Burr, or perhaps even agents of foreign powers hoping to stir up trouble?
It's a mystery that adds another layer of intrigue to this story, and it puts Jefferson in a real bind. He can't ignore these warnings, but he also needs more than just an anonymous letters to justify taking action.
Meanwhile, Burr is still pushing forward. He's got his network of supporters, the Mexico Association is on board, and those French cannons are a real game changer. What's his next move? Does he launch a full-scale invasion of Mexico?
Well, Burr's initial hope was that war would break out between the U.S. and Spain. This would provide the perfect cover for his own actions, allowing him to frame his expedition as a patriotic endeavor to defend American interests. He even approaches both British and Spanish ambassadors, trying to get them to back his scheme, but neither one fully commits.
So he's trying to play all sides against each other, hoping to create the chaos he needs to slip through the cracks. That's risky.
Incredibly risky. He's depending on events outside his control, which, as you know, is a dangerous game in politics and war.
And what about Jefferson? Is he just sitting back and waiting to see what happens?
He's trying to gather more information, trying to determine the truth from the rumors, but he also takes a crucial step to try and diffuse the situation. He pursues a peaceful resolution to the border disputes, with Spain essentially taking away Burr's hope for a convenient war.
It's a smart move by Jefferson. He's removing one of Burr's key pretexts for military action. But how does Burr react to this setback? He must be getting desperate at this point.
His options are narrowing, and his plan starts to unravel. He's forced to revise his strategy. Instead of waiting for a war that may never come, he decides to create his own opportunity.
So he's going to force the issue. This is where things could really spiral out of control.
Yes, and his new plan is even bolder and perhaps even more reckless. He reaches out to General Wilkinson again this time with a revised strategy. They will assemble a force on Blennerhassett Island, a strategically located spot on the Ohio River which will serve as a staging ground for their expedition.
Blennerhassett Island. It's a remote location far from prying eyes, and it sits on a major waterway. I can see why it would be appealing for a covert operation. But how does Burr plan to get men and supplies to such a remote location without raising suspicion?
He relies on a mix of secrecy and deception. To some potential recruits, he hefts at seizing land in Mexico, appealing to their sense of adventure and greed. To others, he suggests liberating New Orleans from what he portrays as oppressive U.S. rule, playing on their regional pride and resentment towards the government.
So he's tailoring his pitch to each audience, offering a mix of patriotism, profit, and rebellion. It's a potent combination.
And let's not forget the role of Harmon Blennerhassett himself, the owner of the island. He gets swept up in Burr's scheme, providing financial backing and allowing his island to be used as a staging ground. It's a fateful decision that will have devastating consequences for him and his family.
Poor Blennerhassett. He had no idea he was getting involved in what would become one of the most notorious conspiracies in American history.
Yeah.
Did anyone try to warn him about Burr?
Actually, yes. His wife Margaret was deeply suspicious of Burr's intentions and tried to convince her husband to back out. But Burr's charisma and promises of wealth had already won Blennerhassett over. It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned people can be drawn into dangerous schemes, especially when they're blinded by ambition or trust in the wrong person.
So while Burr is busy building his army on Blennerhassett Island, what's happening with Jefferson? Has he finally caught on to what's going on?
Jefferson is facing mounting pressure to act. The rumors about Burr's activities are spreading like wildfire. Newspapers are filled with speculation and public opinion is turning against Burr.
It's the classic dilemma. How do you balance the need for action against the risk of overreacting and appearing tyrannical? It must have been a constant struggle for Jefferson.
It was. He's receiving more warnings, more detailed accounts of Burr's plans, and he can't ignore them any longer. Finally, in October of 1806, Jefferson takes decisive action. He issues a proclamation warning of an illegal military expedition being prepared in the western states.
It's a turning point in the story. Jefferson is putting Burr on notice. He's drawing a line in the sand. But does this stop Burr in his tracks?
Not at all. Burr is defiant. He publicly denies any wrongdoing, claiming he's simply engaged in legitimate land development. He even tries to use the proclamation to his advantage, portraying himself as a victim of political persecution.
It's a brilliant tactic, really. He's turning the tables on Jefferson, trying to make him look like the aggressor.
Yeah.
How does Jefferson respond to that?
He doubles down. He orders the arrest of anyone involved in Burr's expedition. Federal agents are sent out across the West, rounding up suspects and seizing boats and supplies.
It's a full-blown crackdown. The game of cat and mouse has begun. Where's Burr during all this? Is he still on Blennerhassett Island waiting for his army to assemble?
He realizes the situation is getting too hot. He flees Blennerhassett Island with a small group of followers just ahead of the authorities.
That was a close call. But what happens to the people he left behind? Are they arrested?
Yes, many of them are Ohio militiamen acting on Jefferson's orders raid Blennerhassett Island, taking those who remain into custody and destroying much of the expedition's equipment. It's a devastating blow to Burr's plans.
So his base of operations is gone, his followers scattered or imprisoned. What does he do next? Does he give up?
Burr is nothing if not resilient. He continues down the Ohio River, hoping to regroup and salvage what he can of his plan. He eventually reaches the Mississippi River, where he manages to connect with a small flotilla of boats carrying men and supplies who had managed to avoid capture.
So there's still a slicker of hope for his expedition. He's got a small force, and he's heading towards New Orleans, where he still believes he has support.
It seems that way, but what Burr doesn't know is that the ground is about to shift dramatically beneath him. And this shift will come from a most unexpected source. His trusted ally, General James Wilkinson.
Wilkinson, the double agent. What's he up to now? This is where we'll have to pause for now, but join us in part 3 as we unravel this final twist and explore the dramatic conclusion of the Burr conspiracy. Wilkinson, the double agent. What's he up to now?
Well, Wilkinson is in a tough spot. Remember, he's been playing both sides, feeding information to Burr while secretly working for Spain.
Right.
But as Burr's expedition progresses and as the rumors of its true intentions reach a fever pitch, Wilkinson starts to get cold feet.
Yeah.
He realizes that if Burr actually succeeds in his scheme, he could be labeled a traitor.
So it's a classic case of self-preservation. He's realizing that he's in too deep and needs to find a way out.
Exactly. Wilkinson sees the writing on the wall. Burr is becoming increasingly isolated, public opinion has turned against him, and Jefferson is cracking down. Wilkinson knows that if he doesn't act fast, he could be swept up in the downfall of the conspiracy.
So what does he do?
He makes a fateful decision. He decides to betray Burr and save his own skin. He sends a letter to President Jefferson claiming that Burr is planning to attack New Orleans and then march on to Mexico.
Wow.
He paints Burr as a dangerous radical, a threat to the very stability of the United States.
That's cold. He throws Burr under the bus to save himself. But do you think there was more to it than just self-preservation? Was there any genuine belief on Wilkinson's part that Burr posed a real threat to the country?
That's a question that historians still debate. Some argue that Wilkinson, despite his shady dealings, may have genuinely believed that Burr's ambitions had spun out of control and that he had become a legitimate threat. Others maintain that it was purely a move of self-preservation, a way to distance himself from a sinking ship.
It's fascinating to think about the complexities of Wilkinson's character. He's a shadowy figure, a master manipulator, but also someone who may have been caught up in events that he couldn't fully control.
It speaks to the unpredictable nature of history. Here we have Wilkinson, this cunning double agent, and his actions, driven by a mix of ambition and fear, end up having a profound impact on the course of events.
So Jefferson gets this letter from Wilkinson. How does he react?
Well, Jefferson had been skeptical of previous warnings about Burr, but this time was different. Wilkinson was a respected military leader, and his account seemed credible. Plus, Wilkinson was in New Orleans. He had firsthand knowledge of what was happening.
Right, so Jefferson finally has the evidence he needs to take decisive action.
Exactly. He declares martial law in New Orleans and orders the arrest of Burr and his followers.
And what about Burr? He's heading down the Mississippi completely unaware that the trap has been set.
Burr arrives in New Orleans expecting to find a welcoming crowd of supporters ready to join his cause. Instead, he finds a hostile military force waiting for him. The game is up.
It must have been a crushing realization for him. All his scheming, all his careful planning had come to nothing. What does he do?
He tries to flee, escaping into the wilds of Spanish Florida, but he's eventually captured by U.S. authorities and brought back to face trial.
So after all that, Burr ends up a prisoner. What happens to him?
He's put on trial for treason in Richmond, Virginia, with Chief Justice John Marshall presiding. It's a sensational case gripping the nation. The evidence against Burr is strong, but proving treason in a court of law is difficult. The Constitution requires 2 witnesses to the same overt act.
So even though it's clear that Burr was plotting something, it's hard to prove that he actually committed treason.
Exactly. And the defense skillfully exploits this legal loophole. They argue that Burr's actions, while suspicious, don't meet the legal definition of treason. In the end, despite the overwhelming evidence of his plotting, Burr is acquitted.
Wait, he gets off. That's incredible.
It's a testament to the American legal system. The bar for proving treason is deliberately set high to protect against politically motivated prosecutions. In Burr's case, despite the widespread belief in his guilt, the prosecution couldn't meet that high standard.
So Burr walks free, but his reputation is ruined. He goes down in history as this scheming, ambitious figure who almost brought down the young republic. What about General Wilkinson? Does he face any consequences for his betrayal?
He faces some scrutiny, but ultimately he manages to retain his military position. His gamble pays off. He escapes prosecution by turning on Burr and providing crucial testimony against him.
It's a reminder that history is often written by the victors, even if those victors are deeply flawed individuals like Wilkinson. What a story. It's amazing to think how close Aaron Burr came to changing the course of American history.
It's a cautionary tale about ambition, betrayal, and the fragility of a young nation still grappling with its identity. The Burr conspiracy highlights the tensions and divisions that existed in the early republic, the role of powerful individuals in shaping events, and the importance of a strong legal system that can withstand even the most challenging tests.
It makes you wonder, what if Burr had succeeded? What if he had managed to carve out his own empire in the West? How would that have changed the course of American history?
It's one of those great historical what-if scenarios that we can only speculate about. Would a separate Western nation have thrived? Would it have eventually rejoined the United States? Would it have sparked further divisions and conflicts? These are questions that historians continue to debate.
If you're intrigued by this story, we encourage you to explore further. There are countless books, articles, and even podcasts dedicated to Aaron Burr and this fascinating period in American history.
And remember, the Burr conspiracy is just one chapter in the larger story of the early American Republic. It's a story full of fascinating characters, political intrigue, and dramatic events that shaped the nation we know today.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Burr conspiracy. We'll see you next time for another fascinating journey into the past.